Au nom du Congrès du Parlement, je vous souhaite la bienvenue. Avant de vous donner la parole, je voudrais évoquer un exemple, un symbole, une référence. Simone Veil occupe désormais une place particulière dans notre mémoire nationale. Survivante de la Shoah, elle a su
collective memory as a survivor of the Holocaust. She has used this personal and collective tragedy to find the strength to become a major political figure in French history. She has played a considerable role in empowering and emancipating women. She has always acted in the interest of the most fragile amongst French society. Her life bears testimony to the sacrifices which need to be made for liberty, equality, and fraternity. Let us pay tribute to her by observing a minute of silence.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Monsieur le Président de la République, je vous donne la parole.
Mr. President, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président du Congrès, Monsieur le Président du Sénat,
President of Congress,
Monsieur le Premier ministre,
distinguished President of the
Mesdames
Senate,
et Messieurs,
Mr. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, members of the government, distinguished members of the National Assembly, distinguished senators. In Article 18, the Constitution says that the President may take the floor before Parliament convened in Congress for this purpose. And sometimes it is indeed necessary to do so. We are living through such a time right now. On the 17th of May last, the French gave me a clear mandate. On the 18th of June, they amplified the strength of that message by electing a large parliamentarian majority to the National Assembly. Today, I would want to tell you about the mandate entrusted to us by the people. I want to tell you about the institutions which I want to change and the guiding principles that I wish to follow in my action. 1,000 different ways led us to here and to this place, to today, you and me, because we feel the same desire to serve the country, even though this desire may not have the same form or phase or have the same consequences. Both you and me know where its source lies, the simple love for the fatherland. Many have been in politics for a long time here. I am not one of those. According to your beliefs, you will combat or support the government I have appointed. But at the end of the day, we all know that we are united by something very deep. Yes, the simple love for the homeland, whether it is the solitude of landscapes in the north of France, whether it is the poor neighborhoods around our cities, whether it is industrial deserts or other constituencies in France, we feel the same love for those countries, for this country, and this makes us impatient to act. Sometimes we feel enthusiastic about action, sometimes we feel angry, but all of these feelings derive from this same love for our country. You, like me, have received the mandate from our people, whether you've been elected by the whole of the population or just one constituency, this mandate is just as strong. Whether it's direct or indirect suffrage, that changes nothing to the nature of this election. Whether you have been elected a long time ago or recently after a campaign where all opinions were able to be expressed in their diversity, and for you to embody these different opinions here today, that changes nothing to the collective obligation upon us. This obligation is our duty to resolutely and deeply transform our country, where we have seen so many disappointments in the past. The obligation is to retrieve and restore to French people the confidence to work towards their ideals. What the people ask us is to go back to the spirit of conquest that made France what it is, to reconcile, in order to reconcile French people with themselves. By making that unheard of step of electing us to the National Assembly, the French people has shown that it is impatient with the current political system. It is also a way for the French people to say goodbye to a certain style of politics by giving their trust to the people gathered in this room. The French have said how important it was for them to work towards change. And I'm sure that you're all aware of that. And I'm sure that senators, too, are convinced of that, even though they've been elected into office for a longer time ago, because they, too, by the very nature of their mission, have had a chance to see those hopes in their constituencies and in the French population at large. And so being faithful to that, loyal to that message by the French people means that we have to show a special kind of courage and dignity, perhaps more so today than yesterday. It's easy to fall back into bad habits, marked by much cynicism and discouragement and even platitude. We are living at a time that people are speculating, still speculating, on the kind of failure that would justify their very skepticism. So it is up to us to belie those fears and that skepticism. It is also up to us to convince those who don't really trust us, and those who have not voted at all in the last elections, those who are disappointed with the ineffectiveness of politicians, and to convince them that there is something to expect from politicians. So what is this mandate that the French people has given to us? What is it exactly? In order to know it, we need to get out of these constant accusations. We need to find more dynamism, whether it's about reforming labor law to the benefit of those who don't have a job, or is it to adapt France to the cruelties of globalized Europe and the globalized world? Is it about avoiding the crisis of public finance so that we save our children from having to pay an excessive price in taxes? Again, we will be criticized. Whether it's about combating the effects of terrorism, again, we will be criticized for whatever we do. So those are the accusations that are always leveled at politicians whenever they try to do something. But this is truly rooted in a denial of reality, the denial of the real world and what is really happening around us, a blindness to the emergency and the many emergencies in our country and in the current situation, whether it's the security issue or societal or social labor-related issues. And in fact, I think French people are much wiser than that, which is why I think that this mandate of ours is both one that requires commitment and one that is profoundly realistic. And so I think we need to go beyond these theoretical and rhetorical oppositions that may look good, but in fact bring nothing to France. It is our duty, thus, to restore the strength of an ambitious vision for a country, not to give in to facile solutions or to illusions as to what the realities of our country are. So what exactly is this mandate, again, which French people have given us? It is the mandate for a sovereign country. That means to be able to make our own choices despite the constraints and the disruptions going on around the world. Let us look at the reality of the world as it is. Alienating forces are very strong, alienating French people to the new division of work with the revolutionary forces of digitalization in particular, which are disrupting the business world, alienating forces that lead to so many living in poverty, something we need to combat, alienating forces in the face of financial forces if we do not get our budget back on its feet, alienating forces in the face of Islamic terror if we do not find ways to destroy it without giving up on any of our principles, alienating forces in light of how we progress towards our future if we're unable to protect the planet, alienating forces in terms of our daily lives as the food we eat, the water we drink are imposed upon us by the only forces of relentless international competition. I strongly believe that on all these points, the people's mandate is for us to give it back its full sovereignty, but it's also about bringing about profound change. Our citizens, French citizens, have chosen to make sure that France again is on the move, because they know that without moving ahead, France is not France. It's because we've had that shared experience in the past years that a France that stands still will go nowhere and produce nothing if not unhappiness, individual and collective. So that is our historic mission. This is my mission. It is the cabinet's mission and your mission. And it is not a mission that is only incumbent on a small select number of people. It is incumbent on everyone to work towards those objectives. France has great resources in terms of innovation and creativity. And I'm not just thinking about the talent in France. I'm thinking about every Frenchman and French woman who wants to carry on with their lives diligently and build a better life for themselves. And the mandate that's been given to us is to create unity where once there was division, and to give those who feel disadvantaged in society their fair place in society. Allow those who are entrepreneurs, who are creators and innovators to go ahead with their projects. The people's mandate is not to install the government of an elite for its own benefits. It is to restore to the people this sense of collective dignity, which means that you cannot exclude anyone. Yet, all too often, we have chosen the wrong solutions. We preferred procedures over results, regulations over initiatives, a rent-based society over a fairness-based society. And I think that with the recent elections and choices of the French people, our citizens are asking us to strike a new path. I refuse, for one, to choose between ambition and fairness. I will not accept that in order to build equality, you need to give up on excellence. The same way, then, in order to succeed, you do not need to trample on anyone. It is our duty as people and as politicians to combine all of these commitments and objectives and to do all of the above simultaneously. Certainly, those who were set in their old ways will be somewhat disrupted in their thinking. And this happens every time a debate arises in our country's history. But we need to understand the full scope of the efforts that will be imposed by this thirst for renewal, which it is our job to bring to quelch. The people's mandate is also the mandate of transparency. We are an old political nation. Politics is very important to French people, and people expect a lot from politicians and maybe blame politicians for too much in some cases. But certainly, I feel that all of you gathered here are depositories of that desire for change, which we cannot betray. And this change has to include behaviors. There can be no reform without confidence, and there cannot be trust or confidence if politicians, even if it is unfairly, but still are seen as being cheaters or people who just are looking for their own interest to the detriment of French people. In fact, there have been changes in the past, and positive changes. We have stopped accepting opaque decision-making, cronyism, conflicts of interest, those kinds of ordinary, almost intangible forms of corruption. However, no one is beyond reproach because even though it is true that we are the depositories of that trust which the nation has entrusted, has given to us, we need to make sure that our behavior is correct and moral on a daily basis. It is important because though we hate corruption, we also hate a society where everyone suspects everyone else and denounces everyone else. And so I think it is also important to stop looking out for scandal, ignoring the presumption of innocence, where reputations and lives are destroyed. This frantic exchange of accusations, which we've seen in all sides of the political spectrum, is unworthy of our mandate. And to go back to this mandate, it is also one of loyalty. The French people want their government to be loyal to the history of our country, but we need to understand what this means exactly. Over the past years, history has been taken hostage by the political debate, whether it's the identity-based debate, open history, closed history, using colonial history to advance your agenda, whatever it is. It is certainly not right for politicians to take French history hostage. It doesn't mean that French history doesn't exist or that we shouldn't be proud of it whilst also looking at the low points in our history. But to us, French history should be not about commentary or political agenda, but acting to move forward as a country, because we will find great models and inspiration in our history. And at the end of the day, we too
what we are, but by looking at reality, by looking at our determination, which is to achieve the best. This is what we call progressivism. It's not to think that every novelty is necessarily a good thing. It doesn't mean following all the fashions, the time and tide of fashion, at every moment, step by step. Identifying what needs to be corrected, amended, rectified, what in some places must be more deeply refounded, renewed, what is missing in society to make it more just and more effective, or more precisely, more just because it is more effective because it is more just. This is an ethics of action and of shared responsibility, loyalty to our history, to our Republican project being acted out. The Republic is not just laws or abstract principles. It's an ideal of freedom, of equality, of fraternity. Every day we have to rethink this in the light of reality. Political action has meaning only if it is accomplished in the name of a certain ideal of man and women, of his human destiny. This idea, France has been promoting this idea for a long time. Nothing else must count in my eyes. It's not the society of entrepreneurs that we want, or the society of public finance being in equilibrium. Those are useful goals, but they're only instruments, they're only tools at the service of the real and only cause with which the name of France is attached and has been attached for a long time. This cause being the cause of humanity. We have different views about how to achieve that goal, but I'm sure that we don't differ about the goal, and we remind ourselves regularly, and sometimes at the worst moments, that we must make our debate more dignified and give it the grandeur, and in the face of so many failures which we have missed in recent years. It is in relation to this mandate of the people that we must draw up our policies for the next 5 years. You will have understood, you already know, we haven't got 5 years of adjustments and half measures ahead of us. The French are not simply curious, they are demanding. And they are very intransigent. They want deep transformation. They hope for deep change. They demand deep change. Let us not fear this change. Let's embrace it, on the contrary. The charter, the roadmap of our action has been set during the campaign. You already know the landmarks. You already know the milestones. Our commitments will be kept. The reforms, the deep transformation, which I have committed to, will be implemented. The Prime Minister, Edward Philippe, whom I appointed so that he can be the agent of change at the head of the government, will be submitting the roadmap for the implementation during his speech to Parliament tomorrow. All of this will not be possible, or will be possible only if we have a strong republic. There is no strong republic without powerful institutions. Born in difficult times, our institutions can resist the periods of trouble. They have shown their robustness. But like all institutions, they are also what we make of them. For several decades now, the spirit that has given birth to our institutions has become less strong because of bad habits, because of certain renunciations. As the guarantor of the good functioning of the public authorities, I will follow 3 principles: effectiveness, efficiency, representation, and responsibility. Efficiency or effectiveness. We need time to think about the laws. We need to design our laws, discuss them, and then pass them. We need the time to make sure that the conditions are ripe for them to be implemented. Wanting our institutions to be more efficient does not mean sacrificing everything to the god of speed. It means having the right priorities, setting the right priorities. Let's put an end to the proliferation of laws. We know this sickness which has been often referred to, and I hope I may have participated in the past to this. Too many laws kill the law, and it reduces the vigor of law and its sense and its meaning. Unforeseen things and cannot dictate the law. The laws are not there to simply follow the day-to-day lives of our country. They are there to deal with the deep trends, the big changes, the key debates, and to give, to set a course. To set a course, it obviously supports the beginnings of a mandate, but passing fewer laws gives us more time to focus on the laws that really fill the gaps or which meet new needs. That is the role of Parliament. Fewer laws, using parliamentary time better, means reserving more time for monitoring and evaluating public policies. I know that many of you have thought about this, and I don't underestimate the progress that has been made over the last few years in this regard. But we must go further, because passing a law is not the first and the most important acts of Parliament. Our societies have become too complex and too speedy for our laws to achieve their full aims without coming up against the principle of reality. The voices of the people must be heard, and they mustn't be seen as opposing, as obstructing the will of the legislator. You will have, and we will have, to work to make sure that we monitor the implementation of the law, ensuring that it stays relevant over time, correcting its impact over time. And this is an obligation. For all these reasons, I wish that a comprehensive review of all important laws, such as the law on social dialogue, on the fight against terrorism, should be carried out over the next 2 years, or over the 2 years following their implementation. We must also reevaluate the older laws to open up new possibilities of repealing laws from the past whose existence would represent a break on the good functioning of French society. Finally, the pace of designing laws must meet the needs of society. There are some emergency situations where the speed of parliamentary work is not fast enough. Think of practices to do with digitalization, protection of copyright, or national security. Our collective time is too slow today. We need the long-term perspective, but we must also act quickly and swiftly. Therefore, the shuttle between the two houses of Parliament should be simplified. We should use commission work more often. Some of you have already worked on this a lot. All of this must be seriously studied and implemented. I am fully aware of the constraints that Parliament has, the lack of resources, the lack of space due to the constraints of today. For this reason, there is a measure which my fellow countrymen have been asking for a long time, which I think is indispensable: the reduction in the number of members of Parliament. A parliament with fewer MPs, but with greater resources, would be a parliament whose work would be more fluid. The parliamentarians would have better trained teams, better trained advisors, more numerous advisors, and they would be able to work better. That's why I will propose to reduce by 1/3 the members of the 3 constitutional assemblies. I'm convinced that this measure will have a positive impact on the quality, the overall quality of parliamentary work. This is not giving in to a sense of anti-parliamentarism. On the contrary, most French people are also sure that this reform is indispensable. This reform, which will have to be implemented, bearing in mind the need to represent all parts of the Republic, all the geographical regions, both domestic France, national France, and overseas French counties and territories. It will aim to give the elected officials of the Republic more resources and greater weight and more power. The duty of being effective must not only weigh on Parliament, the executive must also play its role in this regard, specifically in relation to Parliament. That's the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, the parliamentarians, I have wanted to reserve for you and through you, for the French people, my first political speech since my election. Too many of my predecessors were criticized for not speaking enough and explaining enough the meaning and the course of their mandate. Too many of my predecessors have taken initiatives without informing Parliament sufficiently. I cannot be satisfied with such an approach. Every year I will come before you again to report to you. And if the respect and goodwill that this shows to Parliament is criticized by some, they are wrong. They have the wrong vision of the role of a parliamentarian, or a vague idea of the role of a president, and a certain degree of doctrinaire arrogance. The representatives of the people must comply with the rules of the Constitution which elected them. CS and Mirabeau did not hesitate to assume the responsibility, the mandates that were given to them. The President of the Republic must set the meaning, the vision, the course of his 5-year mandate, and this is what I'm doing today. It is the role of the Prime Minister who leads the action of the government to embody this vision. The Prime Minister will have the heavy task, the difficult task of ensuring the coherence of action, of implementing the actions to be taken, of making the necessary decisions and arbitrations with the ministers, to submit all these to you. I wish that this responsibility should be meaningful, and that's why I will ask the Prime Minister to allocate to each minister clear objectives that they will report on every year to the Prime Minister. Efficiency also requires that ministers should be at the heart of public action. With their departments, they should have more direct contact. I also wanted to reduce the number of members of the private offices of ministers. The renewal of all senior civil servants meets that priority. The aim is to give the heads of the government departments direct knowledge of the policies that they will have to implement, and to share in this way within the government and all government departments the responsibility, the shared responsibility which the people have given us. And they will be subject also to the obligation to achieve the results set out in the roadmap agreed with the Prime Minister, that the ministers must not lose sight of the conditions in which their policies will be implemented. I want the government departments to be more decentralized, to give advice more than to punish, to innovate and carry out experiments. That is the virtuous circle of effectiveness. It is that kind of government that will give all the territories of France the means of being successful and of acting effectively. Our democracy can only be fueled by our action and our ability to change reality and day-to-day life. But this concern for effectiveness will not be enough to make our democracy, to give our democracy the oxygen of which it has been deprived for too long. We want to get rid of the ineffective republic. This means ending the lack of ambition, the routine. We need to breathe the deep air of democracy, and with the diversity of French society, which our institutions have to take into account. We have often accepted change only for others, but not for ourselves. The reality is multiple. Life is diverse. Pluralism is necessary for our institutions, which would otherwise weaken. We have allowed a greater diversity of social, professional diversity, geographical diversity, gender, experience, age, beliefs, commitments. This diversity is a unique combination of skills, of destinies, of which you are the reflection here today. But all of this was not done by magic. It was done because we opened the doors to the citizens, who were deprived of access to the world of politics beforehand. I want this renewal should restore the debate, which is not based on dogmatism, a sharing of ideas, and not authoritarianism. That is why I believe in the virtues of pluralism, in respect, full respect for oppositions, for the opposition, not because it's simply it's a custom, because it is the very dignity, at the heart of the dignity of democratic debate. And it will be our ardent responsibility. The representativeness of our country still has a lot of progress to be made. I will be proposing that Parliament should be elected with a dose of proportional representation, so that all the sensitivities, all the shades of opinion are represented. This is the reason for which we will limit the number of political mandates that individuals will be able to hold. This will be the key to the changes which will become something normal for the democratic respiration which I have been alluding to. The parliamentarians themselves will see in their mandate an opportunity to help the country to move forward, and not just a career opportunity. There are other republican institutions which time has adversely affected, and they have lost sight of their real aim, which is to reflect the changes in French society. The Economic and Social Council and Environmental Council is one of those institutions. Its missions were to create between civil society and political bodies a bridge, to build bridges based on constructive dialogue and proposals quickly and effectively implemented. This intent, this founding intent, has got lost, has not been achieved. So we need to go back to basics. The Economic, Social and Environmental Council must become the chamber of the future, which will reflect all the forces of our nation. For this reason, we must reduce the number by 1/3. We must review the rules of its representativeness. And once these rules have been reformed, we will make this assembly the crossroads for public consultations. The state cannot work, cannot reform without consultations, and this is normal. But the consultative institutions have multiplied. We don't even know how many there are. They all have special reasons. and they do reflect the diversity of civil society. But that was the initial role of the Economic, Social and Environmental Council. By reforming it, we will turn it into the single consultative body, and it will enhance the representativeness of our civil society, and at the same time it will simplify the procedures that simplify lawmaking in our country. This council will become the forum of our republic, bringing together all the skills and shades of opinion, and become a place where all the sensitivities, the shades of the corporate world, the world of work, entrepreneurs, trade unions, wage earners, self-employed people, non-profit organizations, volunteer organizations, NGOs can come together. At the same time, I want the right to petition be reviewed so that the direct expression of our fellow citizens can be better taken into account, and that the proposals of the French can be submitted in a clear and constructive framework and submitted to their representatives. Here, too, what is at stake is the representativeness of our democracy, which must not be limited to elections every 5 years, but day-to-day actions based on a broader representative base, fired by a desire to be more effective. The democratic debate and parliamentary debate will be rejuvenated and will be revitalized. The desire to action and to see society progress will converge on another sovereign principle which we have ignored too often, the principle of responsibility, and a parliamentary activity revived by a clear course, better constructed debates, a parliament that is better able to carry out its role of control of the responsibility of the executive power. I want the parliament, the majority and the opposition in parliament should have more means of expressing the demands for the executive's political responsibility. The ministers themselves must be accountable for what they do in their ordinary functions as ministers. For this reason, I would like to eliminate the Court of Justice of the Republic.
To be abolished. We will have to find the right organization to do that, but our citizens no longer understand or accept why only ministers can avail themselves of this exceptional court. The principle of responsibility throughout our institutions also means that the judiciary must be fully independent. That has to remain an ambition of ours. Despite the impasses and failures we have seen in the past. And I think that could be achieved by reinforcing the role of the superior body of the judiciary, of judges. This council should at least give a green light whenever a judge is appointed. So I want the rules to change. I do realize that this will have constitutional and legal repercussions, which is why I will ask the Minister of Justice and relevant ministers, as well as the presidents of both houses of the Parliament, to submit concrete proposals by this autumn so that we can reach that objective. I want all of the deep transformations that I have just set out before you, and which our institutions so badly need, to be over within a year. And I want us to steer clear of cosmetic adjustments and half measures. Such reforms will be submitted to your vote. But if necessary, I will appeal to the vote of our citizens, of our compatriots. Because the point here is to recreate the link the necessary link between our citizens and our institutions. I want effectiveness, representativeness, and responsibility to bring about a contractual republic where you give your trust and you receive reports on whatever politicians are doing. That is the deep meaning of the social contract that is at the heart of the French Republic. What we will do for French institutions, I want to replicate for our regions and territories too. There is no reason to be afraid of signing new agreements with our regions and territories. We know how well local institutions know what the local needs are. Jacobin centralization is often based on a fear on the part of certain institutions that they will lose some of their powers. So let us not go the Jacobin way, but let's go the Girondin way by signing agreements with our regions and territories. The Conference of French Territories that will be led by the Prime Minister is one possible answer. It won't be just a financial or budgetary conference. This conference will be about finding ways to adjust our policies to local realities, and I'm thinking in particular of overseas territories which have to have all the resources necessary to succeed. In that same spirit of trust and confidence, we will and have already started working on our labor laws so that companies and employees can better self-regulate their relations. We all know that trust requires more attention than an authoritarian system. We also know that trust creates better results, greater results, and creates the kind of peaceful coexistence without which no country can live. France has seen enough trials and seen enough grandeur in its history to not be a child-like population that cannot hear the truth about what has to be changed. And so by doing all of that, we will make sure that French people are restored to the sense of pride that they need in order to keep building our country. And so to fulfill the mandate given to us by the people, we cannot afford to wait, which is why for the French Republic, I will need all sectors of society to be mobilized around a number of principles. And it is certainly the mission of the Prime Minister to do that. I will not draw up a whole list of sectors and professions and regions that will be affected by those changes. But let's keep in mind that the principles that we need to work on apply to everyone. In cultural, territorial terms, we need to, first of all, empower our citizens so that French people do not suffer their lives, but build their lives and are able to do whatever they want to do, unhampered by excessive rules and regulations. I believe in the spirit of the Enlightenment, because our objective is the autonomy of a free, critical, and conscientious individual. Too many in our society feel that they're the prisoners of determinisms. Yet isolation, sometimes territorial isolation, when you have no access to geographic mobility, means that many of our compatriots legitimately feel that they lack liberty. So we have to fight to improve all types of mobility, to improve access generally in our country so that no French people are excluded from the benefits of progress, from the right of trying things out in order to succeed or maybe fail. We also need to ensure better mobility for all people, whatever your first name or your origin. Social mobility is of the essence. Mobility for all, for women and men. In fact, just a few days ago, we have lost an essential symbol of that kind of struggle in the person of Simone Veil. The greatest liberty is the liberty to choose your life. So we need to combine or reconcile the freedom to do, the freedom to fail, the freedom to try again. One's life is no longer one big trip to your destination. It is an exploration of opportunities. So let us support this concept of life by providing education, training opportunities, all the things that are needed to build that kind of life. That is the whole meaning behind the profound economic and social changes which the government will have to conduct in the coming months to liberate and to protect, to make it possible to innovate while ensuring that everyone has a place of their own. And certainly we should avoid false promises or the kind of liberty that would ignore individual protections, because that would only be a path to unhappiness. Or we should avoid the kind of society that wants society to remain as it is, to stagnate when so many need to be helped. So wanting true and strong liberty is wanting all of that together. In times of terrorism, wanting a strong liberty is also ensuring individual freedoms and guaranteeing everyone's individual rights. Let me be quite blunt about something that people oftentimes are squeamish about: Islamist terrorism and ways to combat it. What do we owe to the victims and to our compatriots who died? What do we owe to the France that is grieving after these blind, stupid, and cowardly murders? We certainly owe them much more than commemorations. We owe them a loyalty to ourselves and our values and our principles. Giving up would be conceding victory to the nihilism of those murderers. On the one hand, I will reestablish the liberties of French people by lifting the state of emergency in the fall, because these liberties are the precondition for a strong democracy, because giving up on those liberties would be giving our enemy the kind of confirmation that we cannot afford to give them. The adversaries of democracy have always said throughout history that it was weak, but it is the opposite that is true. The criminal code is the powers of judges as they exist, if the system works properly, can allow us to actually annihilate our enemies. However, giving the administration unlimited power over people's lives without discrimination is senseless in terms of principles and in terms of effectiveness. On the other hand, I want for the government to be able to adopt these new provisions that will reinforce us in this fight. They will have to those provisions will have to target terrorists to the exclusion of all other French people. They will include reinforced measures under the supervision of judges in total and permanent respect of our constitutional obligations and of our traditions in terms of freedoms and liberties. Democracy has not been built only for quiet times. Democracy is especially important in times of trouble. That is the path towards effectiveness, and it is the same path as the path towards values. A unified country, a unified nation around its principles is invincible. That is the actual meaning behind the legislative text which you will have to examine, which you will be submitted. We will work to prevent and repress terrorist acts in our country without remorse, without weakness, and with all the more strength because we know that there is nothing in our principles that we can give up on. I take that commitment before you. Responding to terrorism does not mean changing our constitution every other day or giving up on the principles of our republic. Let us remind ourselves that it was in the very heart of the Algerian war that we voted in this provision of the constitution, which precisely says that the judiciary is the guardian of our liberties. And so today we need to show ourselves worthy of the courage of those who have preceded us in times of trouble. And a strong liberty in the French context is also freedom of conscience, the spiritual, moral liberty, a liberty that France must protect at all costs. Education and culture are a key to liberty of conscience, and that are the heart of our action because it is easy to roll back on those projects. And so the progress of obscurantism reminds us how important it is to fight for enlightened ideals. And so the Republic has never given up on any of these principles and ideals because we realize that they are the precondition of the empowerment of our compatriots. And so based on this general liberal philosophy, we need to rebuild our country with globalization. It is obvious that the voice of France and French people must play an eminent role, including the voice of all sectors of society and our overseas territory. But this liberty would not be enough if our guiding principle wasn't to strive for more fraternity. We are not just 60+ million individuals. We are an indivisible nation because what brings us together, what holds us together is stronger than certain rules or organizational modes. It is something that is a fraternal link that we feel between us and which we need to reinvigorate. One of the tragedies in our country is that such a commitment is just impossible for those that are marginalized in the current old-fashioned system. And so it will be up to us in the 5-year mandate before us to analyze the current situation, see what can be done by bringing together the government, territorial entities, foundations, volunteers, all associations in France that work for the collective interest and individual dignity On top of all of these initiatives, we need to have a real government vision. The Parliament will be able to take that responsibility into its hands. This, indeed, might be the deepest, the most serious question of them all, because our society is divided between the people who want to profit by the opportunities of globalization and the nomads who want to rule and impose their laws on the rest of society, and those who feel the exact opposite way, that everything should be regulated. So that will not work. We will not go forward if all those who live in misery and exclusion, that are deprived of this path to success, do not have their proper place in society. And it is our job to make sure that this happens. It will require a number of deep, profound changes, which it will be your job to bring about. And those are indeed very important. But we will also need to find and try to find the proper place and consideration and a real answer to what writer Georges Bataille called our doomed, the part of our soul that is doomed.
In fact, in the last analysis, the sense of belonging exists less than before. Modern societies tend to fragment on the basis of selfishness, interests, everybody's ideas. Here again, it is us who are in the public life who must resist the forces of division, which are not invincible, if we fight, if we give ourselves the means of acting. Our solidarity must express itself in a concrete way. The school is the first cradle of this, the universities, our families, our culture, the language, access to knowledge, opening up to possibilities, new possibilities, forge a people, forge the solidarity, which we have underestimated. And that's what keeps our society together. In the face of the moral crisis, the civilizational crisis, we must know how to forge, yet again, the deep solidarity and a powerful imaginative future. This is the answer we must bring to those who corrupt society. I referred earlier to Islamist terrorism. There is, of course, the security response, but that will not be enough if we don't also use the instruments of culture, morality, education, which must inspire our collective imagination and our solidarity. Yet again, when we must rebuild what holds us together as a single people, which has had the energy to rise to so many challenges in the past and never give up. The response to all of this will not be just laws or regulations. It's the collective dignity, the restoring of the will to act, the sense of responsibility that each of us has in society to give meaning, to re-give meaning, to know who we are, why we are here, what brings us together, and at every moment to be aware of the challenge we are facing, and not to give in to the spirit of division and to accuse each other of various things. This is what will last. This is what transcends us, and this is what has made us what we are. The third principle of action of our mandate will be to restore the place of French intelligence. And by intelligence, I'm referring to the researchers, the great discoveries, our great physicists, our great doctors, our great inventors, all of those who have contributed to the pride of our country, and they are still present all over the country. We must celebrate them. All too often, we have preferred to show jealousy. I'm thinking of writers, philosophers, historians, filmmakers who continue to bring to the world the free point of view of creators, which makes our strength. Politics has its a role to play. Politics must open up new vistas that give to the human condition its greatness, its beauty, all too often also its tragic dimension. We must restore French intelligence to its place. We must refuse the inconsistencies that undermine our intelligence. We, for example, cannot afford to continue to assert our belief in the right to asylum if we don't allow human processing of requests for asylum by men and women who are threatened by war and persecution, people we called in 1946 the combatants of liberty. Putting French intelligence to the fore means putting our country at the heart of a new humanist project for the world. We must create a more balanced society, production and distribution rather than the accumulation of wealth by a few, equitable finance, digitalization at the service of humanity, and the reduction of emissions, not only because it's fashionable, not just to please a few, but because that is the level of ambition which has always been ours. It's because when day-to-day life is difficult that we have to reconcile so many contradictions that we must combat the egotisms. We must move forward. We must look at the course ahead, and because that is France's calling, that is France's vocation. France is not a country that reforms itself. I'm sorry to say this, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm going to announce today in front of the Congress that you can't reform France. France is a country that resists as long as possible to all attempts to reform. It's a country when you don't explain to the French, if you don't respect them, if you don't talk to their intelligence, they resist. But in the face of the big challenges, they rise to, they know the country has always been able to find the resources, the sense of history of humanity, which has enabled it to become what it is. Your challenge today, our challenge, is that one. So you will be spending nights and days, we will be spending days and nights on the subjects, the issues which are the daily concerns of our fellow citizens. But every time, the horizon and the course that we have ahead will inspire us. To restore the position of French intelligence means understanding that French people are intelligent enough, smart enough to act alone. We mustn't have excessive public intervention. We, of course, must protect the most vulnerable, notably through the labor code. Of course, we must recognize that our public services have an essential role to play. Our civil servants, day and night, are the strength of our nation. But protecting the weakest does not mean turning them into minors, into children, and people who are continually asking for welfare. It's restoring to them the power that they can to act on their own destinies, and everything will be done to empower the French individuals, to give them the ability to exploit their intelligence, to allow each individual, each territory, each local area to succeed and to commit itself. Now, I would like to evoke the last principle of the actions that will inspire my actions, building peace. We know that the world in which we are trying to set a new course for France based on its traditions is a dangerous world. Our environment is characterized by an accumulation of threats. The threat of war. Every time there's a crisis, the threat of war is not only there for the pessimists, it is a real possibility. The assertions of power, the terrorist movements are developing in many different parts of the world with new capabilities. They are there, they are present. There are regional wars which have reached extremities of barbarity. The alliances of the past are crumbling. The multilateral order of the world is crumbling. The authoritarian regimes, the illiberal democracies are flourishing. The cybernetic space is expanding and is providing new instruments for waging such wars. So these excesses of all kinds are destroying humanity and are causing a lot of upheaval, and that is the world in which we live. We are not invited to be over-pessimistic because of this, but it does require us to be sensitive to certain duties, the grave duties of a nation. We must maintain open the road to negotiation, dialogue, and peace in the face of the most sinister threats. The calling of France, its loyalty to its history, is the ability to build peace and promote the dignity of human beings. That's why, everywhere, we must act first and foremost to protect our interests and, above all, our security. And that's why I have reasserted our committed to the Sahel, to the Middle East, to fight against terrorism and all forms of fanaticism. It is in our interests and in the interests of the peoples concerned. I know that our armed forces are committed to this on a day-to-day basis and have been so for many months. But such action can be effective only if it is a long-term effort which aims to find the political solutions that will put an end to the crisis. And if we know in all the regions of the world how to talk to all the regional powers, including those that don't share our own values or our own goals, in order to find a solution. I will not propose in this framework to take over the role of other peoples. We will not attempt to impose our values and our principles. We don't want to foster other rogue states, France or failed states. France, at the same time as it fights against terrorism and excesses and protects its own security and its values, France must respect the sovereignty of other peoples. But wherever liberties are not respected, we will work through our diplomacy, through development efforts to help minorities and to fight for the respect of human rights. This calls for long efforts, difficult efforts, putting France at the heart of the dialogue between nations. For several weeks, this is what I've been endeavoring to do, from Mali to Ukraine to Syria, the Gulf, by engaging in a dialogue with all the leaders of the world. France must everywhere contribute to building or rebuilding new balances, even though such balances remain fragile in many cases. Our military instruments in this context, our military forces have, of course, a major role to play. I've already ordered a strategic review of our strategic and security resources. The common thread is the principle of independence and autonomy of judgment. Our armies will implement the missions I have set them. Our nuclear deterrent will, of course, continue, and we will intervene wherever international diplomacy, international stability are threatened. Crisis management will be managed in a comprehensive way. Stabilization and development are the only ways of creating sustainable peace. Our armed forces, our military capabilities will establish our credibility and our ability to build peace. And this independence, which I call for, does not mean being alone, standing alone. France will be loyal to all its alliances. In the next years, our armies will experience tactical and strategic renewal. I know the armed forces are ready for this. They are already in the front line. They are vigilant, they are committed, and this is what makes our country feel very honored. The threats have never been greater, and the multilateral order of the world is more fragile than it has been for a very long time. Divided, upended, and it was more and more necessary to stabilize the world. In the years to come, the role of France will be to defend security, equality in the face of excesses, liberties, to defend the planet in the face of global warming. All of this is to protect our universal common good, and which is called into question in too many places. We must focus on what is unique to our period. Since the 18th century, we built our civilization on a balance that we thought would be eternal. Liberal values, democracy, our freedoms, a market economy that allowed progress and the emergence of a middle class. All of that is being called into question, transformed, threatened. Authoritarian regimes are adopting the market economy and democracy. We are allies that we thought would be democratic forever, now doubting the value of the rules of democracy. And our calling, our role today is specifically, more than ever before, to remind the world to support the values and to implement the values of democracy. That will be our course of action and no other. So our resistance and resilience are being put to the test. For example, what we are experiencing in the migratory crisis, the migrants from Africa and the Mediterranean, in the next few months, we will have some difficult decisions to take, and we will have to both foresee the problems better through ambitious development programs, more foresight in terms of protection. We have to explain and act everywhere when there is war, when there is global warming, which destabilizes so many parts of the world. We must also better control the migratory flows by better control and fighting against trafficking in human beings. For this, in a coordinated way in Europe, we must carry out in a human way effective action that allows us to welcome political refugees who are really running risk because our values require that. We mustn't confuse them with economic migrants. And we must retain indispensable control over our borders. To keep to this course, we need a stronger, refounded Europe. More than ever, we need Europe. More than ever, Europe has been weakened by divisions, by doubts. And yet, Europe is our homeland. We cannot think of our Europe other than a project, a European project. Europe is us. It's a project based on peace, freedom, progress, which was thought out courageously by the generations of before who experienced the war. And today we want to forget all that. We are tempted to forget all that and to consider that in the face of the divisions, the Brexit and other upheavals of history, the best response would be to reduce Europe even more, to abandon the historic project of Europe, to neglect Europe, to get used to entrusting Europe, to make Europe the responsible for all our problems, is to betray the generations of the past, the previous generations who have made a world where we can freely debate about Europe, whether we like it or not. But neglecting Europe, turning it into a technocratic institution, is to abdicate our historical vocation and to reduce the importance of France. The construction of Europe today, which has been made weak by skepticism, by bureaucracy, I strongly believe that in Europe, but I understand why there is a degree of skepticism about Europe today. That's why I think we should put things into perspective, and we should try to free ourselves from the constraints. And the last 10 years have been a difficult period for Europe. We've had to manage crises, and we've lost our way, we've lost our course, and that's why it is for the new generation of leaders to go back to basics regarding Europe, which is a political project, an ambitious alliance of states which want to promote useful policies based on the freedom of movement of goods, people, and also in terms of taxation and culture. The peoples of Europe, the countries of Europe, we do not reduce Europe to a market. It's a space where a certain ideal of humanity and standards of social justice are recognized as being preeminent. We must renew a decisive project and organize ourselves, if necessary, by examining our conscience and examining the way Europe functions today. So we have a difficult task to undertake. Europe that will proceed to protect people more and support the ambitions of Europe in every field, but that will not be enough. It is up to France to take the initiative, and I hope to do so in the next few months, thanks to close collaboration, which I've already started, notably with the Chancellor of Germany. By the end of the year, on that basis, everywhere in Europe, we will be launching democratic conventions to refound Europe on its initial political ambition, which unites the men and women of Europe, and then each country, each individual can support it or not. But we are not only, this does not require just minor tinkering. It calls for an ambitious reawakening of Europe. We mustn't let the demagogues and the extremists run the show. We must not only carry out crisis management. We must refound the initial inspiration of the European commitment, the certainty that the founding fathers of Europe, that the best of our history, of our culture, can be expressed not through rivalry, even less through war, but by the union of our forces, not by hegemony of one country over another, but by striking a balance that respects all the forces that are present. It is this union that our time needs, that our period, our era needs. This union alone will allow us to rise to the challenges of modern life. And it is in Europe that we share a common vision, and which is forged by the same trials of history. These challenges are the ecological transition, the digital revolution, which is rewriting the rules of society.
Laws and forces us to reinvent the continental law, where for so many centuries we wanted standards to respect humans. It is also humanism, contemporary humanism, and the need to defend it against terrorism and fanaticism, which we will do through a stronger Europe, but mostly through a Europe of culture and innovation. Peace is not just the foundation of Europe, it is the ideal of Europe, an ideal that we should keep defending, and only Europe and France within Europe today can reach that ideal. And so, indeed, we will break away from the freedom we gave ourselves over the past years, the latitude we gave ourselves. And we will make sure that we strike a much more demanding course. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Congress, we are now in a situation where terrorism is still there. The budget situation is not satisfactory. Productive investment is not where it should be, and the level of unemployment is still unbearably high. So life is hard for so many of our compatriots. However, the French people has told us what they want us to do, and we are to act as their servants. There will be unexpected turns of event, oppositions and difficult moments, but we will not let any of this discourage us. Faced with any difficulty, instead of walking away from the task, we will find even more energy and enthusiasm to go ahead and do what has to be done, because we want, I'm sure we all want, to make sure that French people are restored to the sense of pride that they deserve. It is certainly true that French people are not just interested in effectiveness. Effectiveness is an instrument, and in fact, it could be effective in the service of a bad cause. No. The French people are asking us to do what the philosopher Simone Weil called effectivity, in her words, the concrete implementation of the principles that guide us. The constant care not to relinquish your principles, and the constant attention as the government, as members of government and as politicians, to liberty, equality, and fraternity. What we have to accomplish, thus, is a real revolution. You and me are here to go back to the kind of French courage that will not be distracted by those who have not succeeded in anything, and so are disillusioned and cynical about everything. So we need to go back to this French hope, this commitment to the welfare of all, because let's make no mistake, hostile forces are still powerful, not so much in Parliament, where it is legitimate opposition that is expressing itself, or not in the streets of France, but in our minds. In each and every one of us, there is a cynic. And the voice of that cynic is one that we need to silence day after day by always reminding him or her of the importance of what France is going through right now. And then we will be believed, and then we will do what the French people humbly expects from us, and we will do it humbly. And we will keep the promise, which is the greatest of all possible promises. Turning France into a country that's worthy of itself for French people. Long live the Republic, long live France.
La séance est suspendue pour quelques instants afin que je raccompagne le président de la République.